High Admiral Zextal of the Draken Empire stared at the holographic feed in disbelief. The human fleet commander was sitting in what appeared to be a primitive relaxation device, a beach chair, according to their intelligence, on his command bridge. Impossible, Zextal chittered, his mandibles clicking in agitation. Our forces are approaching his position in a standard pincer formation. He should be at his tactical station. Where are his strategic displays? His command interfaces? The human, Commander Chen, was sipping from a container of heated plant extract, coffee, while occasionally glancing at a small personal device propped on his knee. His bridge crew seemed completely unfazed by this irregular behavior, calmly going about their duties as if their commanding officer wasn't flagrantly violating every principle of proper military conduct. Sir, First Tactician Vexmore reported, the human fleet is maintaining their current position. No defensive formations detected. No countermeasures activated. They appear to be waiting. Zextal's compound eyes narrowed. The humans had proven troublesome opponents, but this was beyond comprehension. Their intelligence suggested Commander Chen was one of humanity's most effective fleet commanders, with an unprecedented victory record. Surely this must be some sort of deception. Proceed with the attack, Zextal ordered. All units, execute Protocol 7-. Sir. Vexmore's voice raised in alarm. Quantum fluctuations detected. Massive energy signatures emerging from the asteroid field. Commander Chen stretched leisurely in his chair, took another sip of coffee, and made a small gesture with his free hand. Suddenly, the supposedly empty sector erupted with activity. Dozens of human vessels materialized from carefully hidden positions, their weapons already charged and targeting solutions locked. The Draken fleet found itself caught in its own pincer movement. Message from the human command ship, Vexmore announced, his voice trembling slightly. Commander Chen's relaxed voice filled the Draken bridge. Lovely day for an ambush, isn't it? Though I suppose that depends on which side you're on. Care to surrender, or should I finish my coffee first? Zextal's mandibles clicked rapidly in frustration. How had they been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by a commander who hadn't even bothered to stand up? Perhaps, Chen added casually, you folks might want to consider that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who doesn't feel the need to show you how dangerous they are. The Grand Analysis Chamber of the Draken Military Academy buzzed with agitation. Dozens of the Empire's finest tactical minds surrounded a holographic recreation of Commander Chen's recent victories, their compound eyes reflecting the shifting light patterns as they studied every detail. It defies all established doctrine, senior analyst Krivax declared, manipulating the display to highlight the human commander's beach chair. By all measures, his command style should result in catastrophic failure. Instead, she gestured at the statistical readouts floating above the tactical display. 17 engagements. 17 victories. 0 losses. High Admiral Zextal's mandibles clicked in remembered frustration. There must be a pattern we're missing. No commander achieves such results through lounging. The assembled analysts watched as multiple battle recreations played simultaneously. In each one, Commander Chen maintained his seemingly casual demeanor while orchestrating increasingly complex military maneuvers. Traditional Draken battle computers failed to predict his strategies, their logic circuits unable to reconcile the apparent contradiction between his relaxed behavior and the precision of his fleet movements. Perhaps, suggested junior analyst Mextor, her carapace gleaming with youth, we're approaching this from the wrong angle. What if his relaxation isn't despite his success, but somehow contributing to it? The chamber filled with the clicking sounds of skepticism, but Zextal raised a limb for silence. Explain. Mextor manipulated the holographic display, highlighting the human crew's reactions. Notice how his bridge crew maintains peak efficiency despite their commander's unorthodox behavior. In fact, their performance metrics show higher creativity and initiative compared to our own crews. They're not waiting for explicit orders, they're anticipating needs and adapting to situations in real time. Dangerous thinking, muttered one of the elder analysts. The chain of command exists for a reason. Structure. Order. Precision. Yet they're beating us, Krivax pointed out. Look at the Helios engagement. The holographic display shifted to show a particularly humiliating defeat. Commander Chen had been reading something called a mystery novel, when his fleet split into seemingly random smaller groups, violating every principle of force concentration. The Draken response followed textbook doctrine perfectly, only to find themselves drawn into a complex series of individual engagements that somehow synchronized into a devastating trap. He wasn't just reading, Mextor observed. He was demonstrating trust in his crew's ability to execute their parts of the plan without constant oversight, while our commanders maintained rigid control. Their forces adapted freely to changing circumstances, Zextal finished, his antennae twitching thoughtfully. But surely such flexibility breeds chaos. How do they maintain coordination without strict hierarchical control? The answer came 3 days later, during what should have been a routine patrol action. A small human fleet appeared at the edge of a Draken-controlled system. The response force, commanded by the recently promoted Captain Vexmore, followed standard doctrine precisely. The resulting engagement lasted 6 minutes. When the quantum dust settled, the Draken fleet had been scattered across 3 sectors. Commander Chen's after-action message was typically casual, "Nice try with the textbook response. Maybe next time try writing your own story instead?" The recording of that message played now in the analysis chamber, and Mextor's antennae drooped in revelation. That's it, isn't it? We're trying to decode their doctrine, but their doctrine is to not have a doctrine. Their strength isn't in following a perfect plan. It's in their ability to improvise, Zextal finished. To adapt. His mandibles clicked in distaste, relax enough to see opportunities we miss in our rigid pursuit of perfection. The implication sent ripples of unease through the chamber. How do you fight an enemy whose greatest weapon is their ability to ignore the rules of proper warfare? How do you counter a strategy that isn't really a strategy at all, but rather an embrace of controlled chaos? More importantly, what would happen to the carefully ordered structure of Draken society if such ideas began to spread beyond military tactics? As if sensing their discomfort, the holographic display showed Commander Chen taking another sip of his coffee, his relaxed posture somehow more menacing than any battle stance. The Draken Empire had faced many enemies in its long history. But never before had they encountered one that threatened not just their military supremacy, but the very foundations of their worldview. And Commander Chen hadn't even bothered to stand up while doing it. "Sir, with all due respect, you need to look at this." Commander Chen glanced up from his datapad, where he'd been reading an ancient text on Zen gardening. Lieutenant Rivera's face showed the kind of tension that couldn't be dismissed with his usual casual approach. He set aside his reading and adjusted his beach chair to a slightly more upright position. "That bad, huh?" The tactical display told the story. Draken fleet signatures were appearing across 6 different sectors simultaneously. Not their usual precise, methodical formations, but aggressive, almost desperate patterns. They were coming for the colony worlds. Multiple civilian populations at risk, Rivera reported, her voice tight. They're hitting everything at once. No clear pattern. No, she hesitated, no way to predict where they'll strike next. Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. Finally learning to think outside the box, are they? Interesting timing. "Sir." First Officer Thompson stepped forward, his expression grave. "The Admiralty is requesting an immediate response. They're suggesting a consolidation of forces to establish a defensive perimeter around the core colonies." Battlefield psychology is fascinating, isn't it? Chen mused, taking a slow sip of his coffee. The moment they start losing their rigid structure, they assume we'll tighten ours. Project their own fears onto us. Commander, Thompson's voice took on an edge of frustration, we're talking about millions of civilian lives. This isn't the time for philosophical observations. The bridge crew's anxiety was palpable. They'd followed Chen through countless unconventional victories, but this felt different. The scale of the threat, the apparent randomness of the Draken attacks, the sheer number of innocent lives at stake, it was testing their faith in their commander's unorthodox methods. Chen set down his coffee and studied the tactical display with an intensity that belied his relaxed posture. Tell me, Thompson, what do you see in these attack patterns? Chaos, sir. They're abandoning their usual doctrine completely. Look closer. Not at what they're doing, but at what they think they're doing. Rivera's eyes widened first. They're trying to be unpredictable. But they're thinking about it too hard. There's a forced randomness to it. Exactly. Chen smiled. They're trying to beat us at our own game, but they're still approaching improvisation with a rigid mindset. They're so focused on breaking their patterns that they've created a new one. He tapped a few commands into his chair's small control panel. The tactical display shifted, highlighting subtle correlations in the Draken fleet movements. What had appeared as chaos resolved into something else, a desperate attempt at unpredictability that, to trained eyes, was as readable as their old formal doctrines. Sir, Thompson began, even if we can predict their movements, we don't have enough ships to defend everything. Who said anything about defending? Chen's smile widened slightly. They're trying so hard to be unpredictable that they've left themselves vulnerable to something they'd never expect, absolute predictability. He sat up straighter, and the bridge crew unconsciously leaned forward. They'd learned that when Commander Chen adjusted his posture, something significant was about to happen. Send this to all ships, he ordered. Operation Glasshouse is now in effect. The crew stared at him. Operation Glasshouse was considered a tactical joke, a plan so straightforward and obvious that it had been dismissed as a teaching exercise. It involved moving their entire fleet in the most predictable, by-the-book manner possible. They're expecting chaos from us, Chen explained. They've convinced themselves that our strength lies in unpredictability. So we'll give them the opposite. Perfect, classical formation, straight out of their own tactical manuals. The last thing they'll expect from us is their own strategy. But sir, Rivera protested, they wrote those manuals. They'll know every counter. Exactly. They'll see our formation and assume it's a trap. They'll look for the hidden catches, the subtle tricks, the layers of deception. They'll tie themselves in knots trying to outthink us. He chuckled. And while they're doing that, they'll miss the fact that sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. As the orders went out, the human fleet began moving with unprecedented precision. Every ship took its place in a formation that could have been lifted directly from a Draken military textbook. The effect on the enemy was immediate and devastating. The Draken commanders, already straining to maintain their forced unpredictability, found themselves faced with a scenario they were completely unprepared for, humans acting exactly like they used to. Their attempts to divine the hidden meaning behind this obvious strategy caused hesitation, confusion, and eventually panic. In their desperate attempt to adopt human adaptability, they'd lost their connection to their own strengths. And now, faced with a mirror of their old selves, they found themselves unable to respond effectively to either methodology. As the battle unfolded, Chen reached for his coffee cup, found it empty, and smiled. You know what the real irony is? If they'd stuck to their original doctrine, this might have actually worked against them. Sometimes the best way to help an enemy lose is to encourage them to abandon their true nature. The bridge crew watched in amazement as the Draken offensive crumbled in the face of their own reflected tactics. It was a victory that would be studied for generations, not for its complexity or innovation, but for its profound simplicity. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson. True adaptability isn't about abandoning who you are, but about understanding when to embrace it. The Imperial Archive's restricted section had never seen such activity. Teams of xenoanthropologists and military historians worked alongside tactical analysts, their combined research efforts spreading across multiple holographic displays. At the center of it all stood High Admiral Zextal and junior analyst Mextor, watching centuries of human military history unfold before them. Cross-reference complete, Mextor announced. We've analyzed every recorded human conflict from their ancient Bronze Age through their current spacefaring era. Zextal's compound eyes reflected the shifting images. And the pattern holds true throughout? Consistently inconsistent, sir. Look at this example from their World War II period. The display shifted to show a desert battlefield. Their general pattern was known for rigid discipline, yet encouraged individual initiative. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Theater, their Admiral Nimitz combined careful planning with extraordinary adaptability. And these contradictions served them well? They didn't just serve them well, sir. They defined them. Mextor brought up another series of images. Their Alexander the Great adapted Macedonian phalanx tactics for terrain they'd never encountered. Their Hannibal crossed mountains that everyone considered impassable. Even their fictional military accounts, what they called movies, celebrate unconventional thinking. A new analyst rushed in, their carapace still bearing the iridescent sheen of youth. High Admiral. We've decoded more of Commander Chen's personal database. The display changed to show Chen's reading history. Military treatises sat alongside gardening manuals, ancient philosophy mixed with what humans called comic books. The Draken analysts had initially dismissed most of it as irrelevant data, but now. He's not just reading random materials, Mextor observed. He's cross-pollinating ideas. Taking concepts from one field and applying them to another. It's beautiful in its chaos. Careful, analyst, Zextal warned. Such thoughts border on sedition. But that's exactly the problem, isn't it, sir? Mextor's antennae quivered with sudden insight. We're so focused on maintaining order that we've become prisoners of it. Humans like Chen don't succeed despite their apparent disorder, they succeed because of it. The display showed a new image, Chen in his beach chair, orchestrating the recent defense of the colonies. Beside it, ancient human art depicted warriors in relaxed poses before battle. They've always been this way, Mextor continued. Their strength isn't in their technology or their numbers. It's in their ability to exist in the space between order and chaos. To find patterns in randomness and introduce randomness into patterns. Another analyst approached, this one bearing the marks of the Philosophy Guild. High Admiral, we've completed our review of human philosophical texts. There's something you need to see. The display shifted again, showing an ancient human symbol, a circle divided into two swirling parts, black and white, each containing a spot of the opposite color. They call it yin and yang, the philosophy analyst explained. It represents the unity of opposing forces. Order within chaos, chaos within order. Their entire civilization is built on managing such contradictions. Zextal's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep disturbance. Are you suggesting that their military success is merely one manifestation of a much deeper, philosophical advantage? Sir, Mextor responded carefully, I believe we're not just facing a military challenge. We're encountering a fundamentally different way of seeing the universe itself. The implications hung in the air like quantum particles, simultaneously threatening and illuminating. The Draken Empire had built itself on principles of absolute order, perfect hierarchy, and unwavering doctrine. But here was evidence that the very chaos they'd sought to eliminate might be essential for true advancement. In the center of the display, Commander Chen took another sip of coffee, his relaxed posture now seeming less like a challenge to Draken military doctrine and more like a question mark against their entire worldview. "High Admiral," a senior military analyst called out, "we're receiving reports of increasing irregularities in fleet behavior. Some commanders are attempting to implement human-style tactical flexibility. Results? Mixed, sir. Those who truly understand the principles are showing promise. Those who are merely imitating the surface aspects." The analyst's antennae drooped. "The casualty rates are concerning." Zextal studied the swirling yin-yang symbol. "So we face a choice: remain true to our nature and accept our limitations, or risk everything in an attempt to change what we are." "With respect, sir," Mextor offered, "perhaps there's a third option. The humans don't abandon structure entirely. They've learned to dance between order and chaos. Maybe we could learn to do the same, in our own way." The High Admiral was silent for a long moment. Finally, he asked, "Show me Chen's most recent battle again. I want to see exactly how he used our own doctrine against us. Perhaps there's something to be learned from an enemy who understands us well enough to beat us with our own strategies." As the holographic display shifted once more, Mextor's antennae twitched in what might have been hope. The investigation had begun as a search for military knowledge, but it was becoming clear that they'd stumbled onto something far more profound. The question was the Draken Empire ready for the changes such understanding might bring? Fleet Commander NXVal sat uncomfortably in what the quartermaster had assured him was an accurate reproduction of a human beach chair. Around him, his bridge crew tried not to stare as he attempted to project an air of relaxation while maintaining proper posture. "Status report," he chittered, then caught himself. "I mean, what's up, folks?" The awkward human phrase felt like gravel in his speech organs. His first officer's antennae twitched nervously. "Sir, we've implemented the new, flexible response protocols as ordered. All ship commanders have been instructed to." He consulted his datapad, "go with the flow." In the month since High Command had begun implementing lessons learned from their study of human warfare, the Draken military had descended into what many veterans called organized confusion. Some commanders embraced the changes enthusiastically, others resisted, and most, like NXVal, tried desperately to find a middle ground. "Very good," NXVal responded, then remembered another human phrase from the cultural briefing. "Keep it cool." A signal from the sensor array interrupted this attempt at casual command. "Multiple human vessels detected, sir. It's Commander Chen's fleet." NXVal's mandibles clicked rapidly. This was their chance to prove the effectiveness of their new approach. "All ships, implement randomized response pattern alpha, or whatever feels right to you," he added quickly, trying to capture that human spontaneity. The result was immediate chaos. Some ships, still operating under ingrained Draken doctrine, moved to establish traditional formation. Others, enthusiastically embracing the new flexibility, chose random vectors. Two cruisers, apparently interpreting whatever feels right, quite literally, began executing dance patterns from the recently mandatory Human Cultural Appreciation seminars. On his command screen, NXVal watched Commander Chen's reaction. The human was lounging in his own chair, but there was something different about his relaxation. It looked natural, effortless. Unlike NXVal's own carefully studied attempt at casualness, which was making his exoskeleton ache. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the human fleet they're moving into standard Draken attack formation Delta." NXVal's compound eyes blinked in confusion. "But that's our formation. They're using our tactics again." "Message from the human flagship," the communications officer announced. Chen's voice filled the bridge, carrying that infuriating tone of casual amusement. "Nice chairs you've got there. Having trouble getting comfortable?" NXVal shifted awkwardly in his seat. "We are implementing new tactical doctrines based on successful human strategies." "Yeah, I noticed. Here's the thing about being relaxed, the harder you try, the less it works. Kind of like trying to force yourself to fall asleep. The Draken commander's antennae drooped slightly. We have studied your methods extensively. We are adapting. No, Chen replied kindly, you're imitating. There's a difference. True adaptation comes from understanding yourself, not just copying others. You're trying so hard to be unpredictable that you've become more predictable than ever. As if to prove his point, the human fleet executed a perfect Draken encirclement maneuver. Every move was textbook precise, exactly the kind of rigid tactical doctrine that the Draken were trying to abandon. Sir, the tactical officer reported, we're completely surrounded. They've used our own standard techniques to trap us while we were trying to be unpredictable. Chen's voice came again. You know what the real irony is? If you'd stuck to your traditional tactics, this would have been a much tougher fight. Your natural strategic instincts are actually quite good. But right now, you're like a cat trying to bark, so focused on acting like something you're not that you've forgotten what you're good at. NXVAL looked at his fleet's scattered formation, the failed attempt at spontaneity having left them vulnerable to the very tactics they'd abandoned. Perhaps we should return to our standard doctrine? Too late for that, Chen replied. But tell you what, this is obviously a training exercise gone wrong, not a real battle. Surrender now, and we'll help you get those chairs adjusted properly. Trust me, the angle makes all the difference. As NXVAL gave the surrender order, he couldn't help but notice that his back was indeed killing him. Somehow, that seemed like a metaphor for the entire situation. The incident became known in Draken military circles as the relaxation debacle. But its implications went far beyond a single battle. Throughout the Empire, commanders who had tried to force themselves to adopt human methods were facing similar failures. The more they tried to artificially implement spontaneity, the more rigid and unnatural their actions became. Yet a few observers, like junior analyst Mextor, noticed something interesting in the after-action reports. The few Draken commanders who succeeded in incorporating human tactics weren't the ones who tried to completely abandon their nature. Instead, they were the ones who found ways to gradually introduce flexibility into their existing framework, evolving their methods rather than revolutionizing them. The question was, could the Draken as a whole learn this lesson before their forced attempts at adaptation tore their military apart? The Imperial War Council chamber had never seen such disorder. What began as a formal strategy session had devolved into something unprecedented in Draken history, an argument. The old ways have failed us. Subcommander Kexenaar's mandibles clicked with passionate intensity. His carapace bore the scratches of recent combat, and he'd refused to repair them, a shocking breach of protocol that emphasized his stance. We must embrace change or face extinction. And become pale imitations of humans? Fleet Admiral Ventax's antennae quivered with rage. Look what attempting to adopt their methods has already cost us. 3 fleets in disarray. 2 sector defense grids compromised. Centuries of doctrine and discipline crumbling. High Admiral Zextal watched the debate with growing concern. The division wasn't limited to the council chamber. Throughout the Empire, military units were choosing sides. Some commanders clung rigidly to traditional doctrine, while others attempted increasingly desperate experiments in tactical flexibility. The result was a force that could no longer effectively coordinate its actions. In the midst of this chaos, junior analyst Mextor had been promoted to senior strategic advisor, a controversial decision that reflected the growing influence of the reform movement. She now stood before the council, her young carapace gleaming under the harsh lights. Honorable council members, she began, our latest analysis suggests that both extremes are leading us to disaster. The traditionalists are becoming even more rigid in response to change, while the reformers are abandoning crucial elements of our tactical heritage. We're not just losing battles, we're losing ourselves. The display behind her showed footage from recent engagements. In one sector, a traditionalist fleet maintained perfect formation while being outmaneuvered by human forces. In another, a reformed battle group's attempts at spontaneous tactics resulted in confused chaos. But look here, she continued, highlighting a third engagement. Commander Arexdil's task force. They've maintained our core doctrine while introducing measured adaptability. Their success rate. Heresy, interrupted a senior traditionalist. Success through compromise is worse than honorable defeat. The chamber erupted again, but a sudden signal cut through the chaos. Every display screen shifted to show a live tactical feed. Commander Chen's fleet had just entered the Draken home system. Impossible! Ventax exclaimed. Our defensive grids are in disarray, Mextor finished quietly. Half our ships are following traditional protocols, half are attempting reforms. They can't coordinate effectively. The tactical display told the story. Chen's fleet moved with its characteristic mix of precision and improvisation, exploiting gaps created by the Draken's internal division. Traditional formations broke apart trying to counter expected human chaos, while reformed units' attempts at flexibility clashed with their allies' rigid responses. They're not even attacking, Zextal observed, his voice heavy. They're just watching us tear ourselves apart. On the main screen, Commander Chen's image appeared. He was, as always, in his beach chair, but his expression held none of its usual amusement. You know, he said conversationally, there's an old human saying, the perfect is the enemy of the good. You've got two groups here, one trying to be perfectly rigid, the other trying to be perfectly flexible. Neither one's working out too well, is it? The council chamber was silent. Even the most ardent traditionalists couldn't deny the evidence before them. Here's the thing, Chen continued, humanity didn't become adaptable overnight. We didn't wake up one morning and decide to throw out all our rules. We learned, gradually, to bend without breaking. To keep what works while being open to change. He smiled slightly. Kind of like how I still sit in my chair, but I'm not afraid to stand up when I need to. As if to emphasize his point, he stood, the first time many of them had ever seen him do so. You've got a choice to make. Not between order and chaos, but between evolution and extinction. Between learning to bend, and breaking. The tactical display showed more human ships arriving. Not attacking, not threatening, but their presence made the stakes clear. In the stunned silence that followed, Mextor looked at the divided council and saw the same choice reflected in miniature. The Draken Empire stood at a crossroads, and their next decisions would determine not just the outcome of a war, but the future of their civilization. The question was, could a species defined by order learn to change before change was forced upon them? The next 12 hours in the Draken home system would be remembered for generations as the silent shift. Throughout the fleet, commanders and crews watched their tactical displays, seeing their society's fundamental conflict played out in the movements of ships. On one side, the traditionalist forces maintained their rigid formations, each vessel precisely positioned according to centuries of doctrine. On the other, the reform squadrons attempted their unpracticed versions of human flexibility, their movements betraying their uncertainty. And in the middle of it all, Commander Chen's fleet waited, a living demonstration of the balance the Draken had yet to achieve. In the Imperial War Council chamber, Senior Strategic Advisor Mextor stood before the assembled leaders, her young carapace now bearing the subtle markings of wisdom earned through crisis. Honorable Council, she began, we've been asking the wrong question. We've been debating whether to maintain our traditions or adopt human methods. But look at Commander Chen's fleet again. Really look. The tactical display zoomed in on the human formations. What at first appeared casual and almost random began to reveal subtle patterns. They're using modified versions of our own tactical doctrines, she explained. The underlying structure is there, but they've made it their own. They didn't abandon their nature to adopt ours, they learned from us while remaining true to themselves. High Admiral Zextal's antennae twitched thoughtfully. You're suggesting we could do the same? We already have, in small ways. Mextor highlighted several Draken vessels whose movements showed subtle signs of adaptation while maintaining disciplined coordination. These commanders aren't trying to copy humans. They're learning to be better Draken. A signal interrupted her presentation. Commander Chen was transmitting again. But this time, something was different. He wasn't in his beach chair. Instead, he stood at a formal tactical station, though his posture remained characteristically relaxed. You know, he said, I didn't always command from a beach chair. Started out rigid as any of you, maybe more so. Had to learn that being in control doesn't always mean controlling everything. The council chamber was silent as he continued, the chair isn't about being lazy or casual. It's a reminder to myself. When I'm tense, I miss things. When I'm relaxed but alert, I see opportunities. But that's my way. You'll need to find yours. As if to demonstrate, he gave a command, and his fleet began to move. The formations were precise, disciplined, but with an organic flow that made them unpredictable without being chaotic. It was like watching a dance where every step was planned but every performance was unique. The real strength, Chen said, isn't in being rigid or flexible. It's in knowing when to be which. Like right now, I'm standing because the moment calls for it. The chair's still there, though. Always will be. Something shifted in the Draken command center. Perhaps it was the sight of this human commander, known for his casual style, showing that he could adapt while maintaining his essential nature. Or perhaps it was simply time for change. High Admiral Zextal rose. All fleet commanders, he announced, execute Adaptation Protocol 1. The order spread through the fleet, and something remarkable happened. Ships began to move in formations that were recognizably Draken but subtly different. Traditional patterns flowed with new grace. Reformed units found structure in their flexibility. It wasn't perfect, there were hesitations, mistakes, moments of confusion, but it was authentic. Even more remarkably, no one was court-martialed for imperfect execution. Commander Chen watched the display, a slight smile on his face. Now that, he said, is more like it. Not trying to be human, not stuck in rigid patterns. Just, growing. The Council recognizes, Zextal announced, that true strength lies not in perfect adherence to doctrine, nor in abandoning our nature, but in learning to grow while remaining ourselves. He turned to Mextor. Your analysis was correct. We needed to learn from humans without becoming them. The tactical display showed the combined fleet movements, Draken ships finding their way toward a new kind of order, human vessels flowing around them in complementary patterns. It was neither the rigid precision of old Draken tactics nor the fluid adaptability of human methods, but something new, a synthesis that respected both. You know what the best part is? Chen's voice carried a note of genuine pleasure. Now we can actually learn from each other. Your precision, our adaptability, imagine the possibilities. As the tension in the system eased, Commander Chen returned to his beach chair. But the Draken observers noticed something new. His posture was relaxed, yes, but there was a subtle alertness to it. Just as they were learning flexibility, it seemed he too had found a balance between his casual nature and the formality of the moment. The day would be recorded in Draken history as a turning point, but not for the reasons anyone had expected. It wasn't about winning or losing, rigid or flexible, order or chaos. It was about finding the courage to grow without losing yourself in the process. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. True strength isn't in being unchanging, nor in changing everything you are. It's in having the wisdom to know what to preserve, the courage to change what needs changing, and the serenity to tell the difference.